and take that down, Stefan. All right, welcome everyone. This is our Fireside panel, and we have three really lovely guests here today. So we are going to discuss current ethics issues, and if we have time, we can take some questions too. Really, we want to look at the future of government ethics. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Rashee. I'm the General Counsel at BEGA. I went to school a long time ago. Went to the University of Texas first, and then Southern Methodist University, Dedman School of Law, and became a prosecutor in Dallas County, Texas before moving here. And upon moving here, got a master's degree in journalism and did the thing that many DC government attorneys do and started my career here in the Office of Attorney General. So about 7 years or so ago, I transitioned into agency counsel work, and that's where I have been since. And let me introduce for you our panel. Delaney Marsco is a senior legal counsel at the Senior Legal Counsel for Ethics. Well, good start already, right? At the Campaign Legal Center. I'm sorry, Delaney. Delaney works on CLC's ethics watchdog and policy reform efforts at all levels of government. Her work helps hold public officials accountable to the voters and shape stronger ethics rules and laws across the country. Delaney's work encompasses a wide range of ethics issues, including congressional stock trading reform and conflicts of interest in the federal executive branch. Her watchdog work has led to numerous investigations into ethics violations by members of Congress and senior executive branch appointees, and her expertise is regularly relied on for ethics reform legislation. Delaney's expert analysis has been featured in national print news publications, including the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And she's appeared on television and radio programs to include CNBC, C-SPAN, and NPR. Prior to joining CLC, Delaney was an associate in Goldman Sachs Financial Crime Compliance Division, where she created, tested, and administered firm-wide electronic surveillances. Delaney graduated cum laude from The Ohio State University, Moritz College of Law in 2015, and received her undergraduate degree summa cum laude from the State University of New York at Buffalo in 2012. She is admitted to practice law in the District of Columbia and in New York, and she joined CLC in 2018. Welcome, Delaney. Our next panelist is Darrin P. Sobin. Darrin is the Chief Programs Officer at the DC Bar, overseeing the Bar's Regulation Counsel Department, which includes legal ethics, the Practice Management Advisory Service, Lawyers Assistance Program for Mental Health and Substance Abuse, and the Client Security Fund and the Fee Dispute Program. He also oversees the Continuing Legal Education, CLE, program for the DC Bar's communities, formerly known as sections. Mr. Sobin served as the first Director of Government Ethics here at BEGA when BEGA was created in 2012. Prior to that, Mr. Sobin served in the DC Attorney General's office. See, there's a little theme here. As a counselor of government ethics and legal ethics in the Legal Counsel Division. He clerked for Judge June L. Green of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia and worked in private practice for several years before rejoining the government. Mr. Sobin was a contributing author for the 2021 National Association of Attorneys General, the Anti-Corruption Manual, a guide for state prosecutors covering administrative remedies, how ethics boards deter and punish corrupt behavior. He has also written for Washington Lawyer magazine on similar anti-corruption efforts. Mr. Sobin grew up in the district and is a graduate of what is now the UDC David A. Clark School of Law and the George Washington University. Welcome, Darrin. Last but not least, we have Liz Ziegler. Liz joined the Missouri Ethics Commission, MEC, staff as General Counsel in August 2006, where she advised and represented the commission in matters of public official conflict of interest law, campaign finance, and lobbying matters. She began her current role as the MEC's Executive Director in July 2018. As Executive Director, Liz is responsible for the administrative operations of the Commission and its employees and serves as a liaison with the regulated community, state officials, and the public. In addition to her role at the Commission, Liz also serves as president for the Council for Government Ethics Laws, COGEL. Prior to joining the MEC, Liz served for 8 years as a Missouri Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division. They do it in other states too. And then served over 13 years as the Executive Director of the Missouri Office of Prosecution Services, advising and training county prosecuting attorneys. She is a graduate of the University of Cincinnati with a BBA and the University of Akron School of Law. Welcome, Liz. I like that we're talking about the future of government, and I had printed out everything and have all of this paper here. Well, given that we know a little bit about each of you, I think we kind of wanted to start in kind of figuring out where government ethics is going. So the American workplace, of course, is becoming more and more virtual every single day. Given that, where do you see the state of government ethics in 15 years? And after that, well, I'll wait that for after that. Where do you see the state of government ethics in the next 15 years? Any one of our panelists can jump in, or I can call on someone.
That's fine, I'll start. You know, because I always, when I hear government ethics, I always want to define what that means, because it can mean a lot of different things. And so, for example, in Missouri, our commission regulates campaign finance, a governmental conflict of interest, personal financial disclosure, and lobbying. So, you know, once we determine what government ethics is, it's also a question of what we regulate. Is there a law? You know, what are the rules? And so in our current state, I mean, our laws, at least in my state, are written in such a way that they haven't caught up with the future. In terms of, you know, where we are now technologically. And so I'm optimistic that in times, you know, often with government ethics laws, at least again, in my experience, it has been reactive. And it's kind of slow. So it's kind of hard to be caught up. I'm very hopeful in 15 years that we can get to a place where our government ethics laws, there's some consistency. People know what the rules are, because that's usually the most important thing. But, you know, in my experience with different states, the district, maybe the federal government, you know, there's a lot of diverse laws because of the changes in technology. So, you know, I'm optimistic, but the laws really need to catch up.
I'm happy to jump in too. I think, as Liz mentioned, and as the question kind of assumes, like, it's so challenging to predict the future and what technology is going to look like in the workplace, in the government workplace, in the ethics world. I was talking to a colleague earlier today who has high school aged kids, and 15 years ago, I was in high school and I did not have Snapchat. I did not even have a smartphone. And now we can't imagine a world without smartphones, right? And so I think kind of having that crystal ball is impossible, but I think Liz's point is exactly correct, that laws often lag behind these technologies. They lag behind cultural changes. And so it's important to start thinking now about what's already out there and how it can evolve and impact the space that ethics commissions are regulating, are overseeing, and determining how the laws will apply, could apply, and then where the gaps are, where we're kind of already seeing the gaps, or places that are vulnerable to abuses of new technologies, whether it's, you know, online Slack channels or Zoom or social media. And there's kind of, I think, some ways to predict the direction of some of these like new tools that are out there, but a lot of times it's really hard. So I think keeping consistency, as Liz mentioned, is really crucial, and just keeping the focus on the mission of of what ethics commissions are designed to do, which is increase transparency and hold people accountable when they're violating the public's trust. And if you have that as a North Star, you can kind of navigate these new challenges, I think.
And I think you guys both make great points. I don't have too much to add, except maybe from the enforcement side of things, I might suggest that because of this rapid increase in technology and connectivity in a virtual world, things are going to be a lot more difficult to get away with in the future. And I say that because virtually there's an electronic footprint for everything we do when we're virtual. There's email, there's texting, there's a lot of these Zoom calls are recorded. So in the old days, you know, where you might not have been privy to a bribery request between two government officials, now there's the potential for having, you know, such things recorded and discoverable. So I think it's a good thing on the enforcement side that at least, you know, for deterring wrongdoing and punishing those who commit ethics violations, because it's just there's more tools available. That's all I'll say.
I don't want to derail us too much, but I am curious what we think causes the gaps. Like, is it strictly a budgetary thing, or you don't have to answer?
I could, I mean, I will be brave and say, you know, it's hard. I'll be honest, it's hard in our state to get the legislature to react. You know, one thing that has happened in Missouri 3 times since 2017 is we've had ethics reform through initiative petition from the voters. And so when, you know, I came to the commission with a lot of experience with legislation, but I will tell you that, you know, it's a challenge. This area of the law is really a challenge to get the attention, to get some of the reforms passed. And now it may be different in other states, but, you know, I'm sorry to say that that's true. And it really does take, it's reactive. It really takes, you know, there has to have been a scandal. There has to be the need seen. And of course, these are the individuals who really have firsthand knowledge of these laws. So.
That's totally right. And I'll double down on that, and I'll just give you an anecdotal story here. It is a sad situation when, you know, it is reactive that we need, that we get things done. I mean, that's why BEGA was created, because we had like a quarter of our council members facing prison time at the time for violations, and there was no one that was doing anything about it, really, at least not effectively. And that's what caused us to be created. You know, on the criminal side, you know, it wasn't necessarily enough to constitute a criminal violation in some cases, and there wasn't a civil side function, and the employee side function, you know, when it comes to disciplining employees, was also pretty ineffective because it all depended on where you worked, in what agency, and how strictly they would deter ethics violations. So consistency is critical to an effective ethics regime, and I don't know how to get around the immediacy and the non-reactiveness that we need to get some of these things passed. I mean, in our legislation itself that created us in 2012, one of our first directives was to create a comprehensive code of conduct, and we did, and we put it out there, and the council, at last time I checked, we're 10 years in now, and the council has not passed that legislation. It's gone up for consideration, it's gone down, it's expired, and I believe that maybe in part it's because of there haven't been any huge scandals that would prompt that kind of passage. But as they say, it is what it is.
Okay, now ready to get into the weird stuff? How can the metaverse and other augmented or virtual realities influence government ethics? And I can give a brief description of what we're talking about when we're talking about the metaverse. So this is from wired.com, an article called "What is the Metaverse Exactly?" To help you get a sense of how vague and complex a term the metaverse can be, here's an exercise. Mentally replace the phrase the metaverse in a sentence with cyberspace. 90% of the time, the meaning won't change, but that's because the term doesn't really refer to one specific type of technology, but rather a broad and often speculative shift in how we interact with technology. Any takers? Because then the next question is, what happens if you commit an ethical violation in a virtual world?
Okay, I'll go ahead. Were you gonna go ahead?
Oh, go ahead, Liz. Yeah.
You know, again, I think it's what I've sort of discussed is the question becomes, what is governmental ethics and is it regulated in this new situation? So, you know, sometimes you have conduct, but again, you know, we have to catch the laws up. So, for example, you know, to piggyback on your question of, well, what if you commit an ethics violation in a virtual world? Well, it depends on what the violation is. In the campaign finance, for example, area that we deal with a lot, you know, everybody around election time, and then we're getting close to election time, you see the signs and the signs have to say who paid for it. Well, our law still applies to printed matter. It doesn't apply in a virtual world. So in reality, there would be no violation. And so it really, again, it depends upon, have we caught up with it? There may be behavior, conflict of interest that may be a violation. And I think, you know, this is one thing that has been said, that nowadays we capture everything. So as Darrin, I think, suggested, we may have more proof of an ethics violation in the conflict of interest. So it, you know, it just really sort of depends upon the type of behavior or, you know, what we're dealing with. And yeah, I think, you know, nowadays when I think of some of our conflict of interest complaints that we receive for public officials, we go straight to the website first. Is the meeting been recorded? Do we have the evidence right in front of us? And we see a lot more of that now. So it just depends, I guess.
And the other thing I would say to that is that, you know, an ethics violation is a violation, whether you commit it in a virtual world or not. But Liz is exactly right. We have got to close up any loopholes, like where it doesn't say printed, right? It's a digital ad instead of a printed. But for the most part, there's nothing about a virtual world that that insulates you from committing an ethics violation. In fact, I would argue in some cases it makes you more vulnerable because it's out there so much more.
And I'll just add that, you know, I think this is one of those areas where it's kind of, there's probably a bit of a patchwork right now where we see a lot of the laws that are already on the books kind of maybe even seamlessly apply to government work that's conducted on the internet. I'm thinking of like Hatch Act violations. You know, you can commit a Hatch Act violation on the internet, and in fact, a lot of people have by tweeting or you know, putting something out on the internet using their official title. And, you know, that's just something that's kind of built in to how the law works, and guidance has been issued that encompasses like kind of the social media world where so many of us like live a big part of our lives on work, at work and otherwise. But yeah, there's going to be new like places and new interactions and new technologies that are used. And, you know, of course that will impact government ethics, because wherever government business is being conducted, there has to be oversight of that to make sure that it's, you know, all above board, the public's trust is being protected and prioritized. And so there are definitely going to be challenges, but there also might be some areas where it will be less challenging, which is good.
Good point, because that brings us to the next question of are there any specific technological advances you're looking forward to, or how can these technological advances, ones that are coming forward, help aid in government ethics work rather than, you know, us having to be reactive all the time? Is there anything that could help in any part of the world of ethics, of financial disclosure, investigations, lobbying enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'll start. I mean, we at Campaign Legal Center have, last year we put out a report on top 10 transparency upgrades that ethics commissions can implement. And a lot of those upgrades utilize technology, whether it's kind of a heat map of enforcement actions or using social media to kind of get stakeholders more engaged or keep them informed, or even just engaging the public in the work of an ethics commission. So there are a lot of tools that people use that don't require laws to be passed by the legislature, which, as mentioned earlier, can be a little bit challenging. You know, there are these tools that can be used that just help the public access information that ethics commissions already spend a lot of time and resources collecting and you know, making sure accurate and timely. And then there's just kind of the additional step of getting it out to the public, and that is something that the internet has really helped with and continues to help with as it evolves. And then, you know, on the enforcement side, we're putting out another report in a few weeks focused on kind of enforcement tools that ethics commissions are using across the country. And, you know, there are people who are using technology to conduct audits of their financial disclosure reports that they collect, and lots of other sort of like technological resources using like searchable databases and things like that. So, you know, there are a lot of ways that ethics commissions can implement these advances without having to get the buy-in of the legislature. And of course, there are systems that, you know, you have to put in place when you're using technology. You can't just blindly rely on it. And it has to, of course, serve a purpose. You can't just have a technological upgrade just for the sake of tech. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. I'm happy to go into more detail about anything, but I can also share my report with you guys, and you can send it out to whoever.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Can I jump in if that's okay? Because
Yeah, of course.
you know, the thing that I love, and of course I'm no technology expert, but let me tell you, when I first came in 2006 and realized I'd been with the state for a very long time, at our ethics commission, you know, we have about 24 employees. We had one employee, and her only job, and there was a room for her to do, was to scan paper. I mean, paper was moved, it was moved here and it was moved there. And then we had what is now our small conference room was literally a paper room. That's where all those paper files were. And so, yeah, transparency has helped us a lot. And, you know, for example, and so there's, you know, better information for the public, because the more we can put information in a database rather than a PDF, it's much more searchable by the public. And so there's just a lot of good information out there. We years ago, and this was before I was the director, we have a requirement to do an annual report every year. Well, I can't tell you what that experience was like, but by the time we would get the annual report together, it was out of date and nobody was really looking at it. So one of the first things we figured out that we could do was pull from our databases. So instead of, and we still call it our annual report, our statistics system, but it's real-time data. So somebody can go to our website now and see nice charts and all kinds of things to tell them how many committees we have, how many registered lobbyists. I mean, it's wonderful, and it's real data. So that is an area that of real improvement. And I, you know, the other thing that I will say, investigation enforcement wise, we do a lot of subpoena work in campaign finance. And most of our auditing is really campaign finance, not as much with the personal financial disclosure. But, you know, nowadays, instead of the bank sending all of the bank records, they can give us a download. And our auditor can get a download from our IT department, and it's just so much more effective. And so I'm sure there's new technology coming on the forefront, and we look so forward to it, because anything that we can do to make it easier for us and easier for the public to access the information is wonderful. And I'm sorry to say, well, we no longer have that position. She's able to do something else much more useful than sit at a scanner all day. And that's literally what we were doing.
But Liz, you make a great point, because open government really is a big part of this. And I think it's the reason why the Office of Open Government was attached to the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability when we were created, because it goes part and parcel. So the Office of Open Government is responsible for ensuring access to government information by members of the public, and to facilitate that where it's appropriate. And it's under the old premise, sunlight is the best antiseptic for corruption. And the fact that, every day we are trying to find additional ways to make information available to the public in a digital way, so that they don't have to go through the process of filing a FOIA request. Then you get the documents, right? And then you go through the document line by line, and you cross things out, and you redline. Those days, I think, are pretty much over. Our mission is to put everything out there that we can put out there without having to be asked to do a FOIA or something similar. So that is an ongoing process, and I think technology is only going to further assist us as we do that.
Well, that was my follow-up question, was on open government. So I'm glad you already hit on it. So in recent years, regulators have ramped up efforts to regulate cryptocurrency more heavily. We have started seeing it in financial disclosure, or in questions around financial disclosure, such as, is this an asset? Do I need to disclose this? How should the ethics community respond to these efforts to regulate cryptocurrency?
Quickly. Very, very quickly. We did an opinion at the DC Bar 2 years ago on whether or not a lawyer could accept cryptocurrency as part of a retainer, as a retainer agreement, or in payment for services. And they did it, the Legal Ethics Committee did a deep dive into cryptocurrency, what it meant, what the risks were. And they ultimately came out on the side of saying, listen, that, we don't like it very much, but this is the future. And we better get used to it. So they put some safeguards in place for the clients, and requirements for the lawyer. And of course, you can imagine some of the scenarios here. The lawyer takes a retainer fee, and the cryptocurrency is worth $1,000, and suddenly it's worth nothing, and the lawyer goes after the client for the $1,000, or the $1,000 suddenly turns into $100 million, and the lawyer's like, well, thank you very much, I appreciate it, right? And so we felt like we had to get something out there pretty quickly, and we did. And so lawyers can now accept cryptocurrency under very specific circumstances and with certain safeguards for the client.
Available on DC Bar's website?
Sure is. Opinion 378. Let me just double check to make sure I got that one right. Yes. Opinion number 378, acceptance of cryptocurrency as payment for legal fees.
That in the chat for everyone. So Delaney, any thoughts on crypto?
I think it's kind of it's a really weird frontier. I still am confused by cryptocurrency, and I've kind of thought a lot about it. So I can only imagine, as more and more people are kind of accessing the crypto world, there can be more and more confusion around it. And of course, there are instances where government ethics laws already apply to cryptocurrency. We saw you know, a while back, there was a member of Congress who was promoting cryptocurrency or a cryptocurrency that he had not disclosed that he was actually invested in. And that implicated a number of government ethics laws that were already kind of on the books. And, you know, he was investigated for possible violations related to the non-disclosure of the asset, and then, you know, also the endorsement of a product of this like currency, right? And then, you know, I know the Office of Government Ethics just put out an advisory over the summer about how cryptocurrency is treated as an asset under certain laws. So, you know, I think there are definitely more efforts to address kind of what this new thing is and how it applies in certain spaces. But I think it's also a really good example of now there's a little bit of catch up, right? Like it's kind of something that's existed for a while, but it's now kind of just bubbling up more and more. And government agencies are just now catching on and trying to figure out what to do with this. So I think it's a good lesson in like trying to, as best we can, kind of be on top of these things, predict the future as best we can, and figure out if there are any gaps that need filled before it's kind of too late.
If I may, one, you know, and that was perfect, Delaney, because, you know, I was thinking to myself, we've received phone calls every day, and, you know, it's really not something that we have addressed. And, you know, sometimes we have to interpret law. We don't want to make law, but we'll have somebody on the other end of the phone who just wants to know the answer. And, you know, sometimes we really have to educate our public, our, you know, people that we're serving, that we don't always have the answers, because, I mean, they're looking to us for those answers, and it's really hard. So I just think really staying on top of the idea and having people understand, maybe to some degree, to the extent that this is a challenging issue, that we need some time to address it. But, you know, it doesn't help when we have somebody a candidate on the phone saying, can I now accept Bitcoin? You know, and we don't know, you know, that's a good question. Let us try to figure that out. So that does happen sometimes.
Thing with this digital theme, many government agencies are seeking to connect with their stakeholders through social media by creating either a Facebook or an Instagram account. What are your thoughts on the newest social media developments? And you think we're going to start seeing government ethics folks doing TikTok dances, or where's this going?
I think that there's multiple issues there, because we at our commission, we are using social media to communicate information. So it's really helped us. And so primarily we use Twitter. So, you know, I realize you're asking about TikTok, and, you know, we're still figuring out Twitter, but, and we also have a YouTube channel, but that's how we're getting the information out. One thing that when we went to Twitter, you know, we were trying to decide, what about Facebook? What about some of these others? And where our concern was that we really are apolitical. We do not want to engage in the political debate. We want to get the information out. So to the extent that we may be on a platform which allows more discussion and debate, you know, that's really our fear to some degree. And so that
You don't respond to tweets.
Yeah, we do not
It's just you
respond
put
to
it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Kaylee, our wonderful training assistant, she monitors our Twitter account, and she can see the tweets, but we do not respond unless it's, I mean, in a rare instance, if it's informational. But I think that we look for platforms where there's a little less back and forth because we have that concern. So we may be behind the times, but I will also say that when you talk about videos and things anyway with TikTok, which I'm no expert on, but you know, any way that we can reach our community to educate them is wonderful. And so, you know, we started our YouTube channel, which we have linked to our website so we can put videos out there. So I'm not quite sure about the TikTok piece. We are on YouTube, but you know, there's really it's a really good way to get that information out. And, you know, you can do it quickly, especially we had a situation on a deadline day for a campaign finance report. And we're talking about, this is right before, I think it was the primary election. I think it was the July quarterly. So July 15th for an August 2nd primary, there was a huge internet outage all over. And so people could not get on and file their reports on deadline day. They couldn't reach the website. It was a nightmare. And we were able to, once we figured it out, you know, that we really had a problem, and we had a problem for about 6 hours that day, we used Twitter, and that's what we did. And then we were on the phone with some of our other, you know, some of the people that really utilize our services, and they were tweeting and they were trying to help us get the information out. And, you know, we finally got back up at about 5 o'clock, 5:15. I mean, it was a very harrowing experience. Our phones were out, everything. So, you know, social media helped let us get the information out about what was happening. So.
Yeah, it's another tool, and it's a good one. I mean, if really an effective ethics regime depends upon engagement as much as anything else, that's what you want to see. You just have to be careful, as Liz points out, you know, about communicating information. You know, you don't want to be rendering, you know, government ethics opinions, you know, with a tweet, because you don't know what the facts are, and you don't know, you know, all the different things that when you draft an actual opinion that, you know, you have pages to do as opposed to how many characters. So but overall, I think it's a very effective tool for engagement.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a great transparency tool, and I think importantly it meets people where they already are and can help, you know, engage an otherwise disengaged audience with the work of the Ethics Commission. I mean, most people have some sort of social media account now. I mean, I was on Twitter already today, and just kind of getting the information out there, even if it's a tweet that says we filed or like all the reports were due today, view them on our website, or we issued an opinion today, view it here. Just a way to get information to people where they already are. And I think also it depends on who your audience is. I mean, I know there are ethics commissions who use it as a way to engage with like their own stakeholders, like people who are already following them for advice or information or training or something, you know, the regulated community. And they put out training videos like that they already put out on their website. They just also tweet them out. And so it's just another avenue to get the information that you're already trying to push out to get it out.
Where do we think that professional networks like LinkedIn kind of fit in? Because if you're a government employee, you clearly will have your employment on there, right? So what advice do you give, or advice do you have for LinkedIn and the use of LinkedIn?
You mean LinkedIn for government employees individually having LinkedIn accounts and so forth?
Yeah.
I mean, just because you claim to be acting in your personal capacity doesn't mean you are. If you are, you know, mentioning your employer in your social media, I mean, there's a lot of law out there, I think, that supports that. If you're making a connection, and even if you're not, to your employer, you know, the employer has a say in your discipline. I think that probably makes sense too on the government ethics side. If you say something or do something on social media that would otherwise be unethical, it's unethical, and a claim of personal capacity does not work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like an additional thing to be careful of, because it's marketed as like a professional development tool. And just because it's a professional development tool doesn't mean it's not also social media. And so it should be treated like any other social media account where, you know, if you're going to commit an ethics violation on Twitter, you can also commit that ethics violation on LinkedIn.
You know, the mom in me, as well as the, you know, the attorney and director, is also, you know, reminding people, you know, what you have there is visible to everyone. I mean, and so when I think of government employees also, and it's not really an area that my commission delves into, but you do want to be very careful. I know when we are interviewing or we have applicants, I mean, we're looking around to see, I mean, what are they saying on LinkedIn? You know, if they have an open sort of thing. And so people always need to remember that. People always need to remember that it's out there. And so I think of it less in that respect as a regulator, more as an advisor, you know, to always remember. And I think it is an excellent point that as soon as we link to our into our employer, you know, they're now a party to where it is and how people see us. I know our employees, we do have a policy because we want to be very careful. We don't engage in political discussion online. And, you know, it can really be a challenge, you know. My kids are now old enough to say, "Too bad, Mom," you know, that kind of thing. But people really, really do kind of look for that. And to the extent that you may be having an effect on your employer, it's really something that should be considered. Now, again, we're sensitive to it because we regulate the political world. But it's always something to remember, I think.
Got a pandemic question for you now. So many of us have been working from home for the last 2 years or so, maybe starting to go back on a rolling basis. Where do you think working from home will be in the ethics space moving forward? Is there a vital value for ethics professionals in reporting for in-person work, or do you find that the work gets done just as well virtually?
Well, I can't speak for the others, but at BEGA, I don't think we've missed a step in the last 2 years when it came to our investigations. You know, we have a very robust investigative team and our lawyers working with them, you know, to investigate and close out cases or bring cases where appropriate. So we haven't missed a step. What does it mean for the future? That remains to be seen as people start getting back into the office. I think it was more difficult for our folks to do these investigations just because of those challenges. You know, sitting across from somebody in our conference room, watching their body language is a lot different than, you know, sitting across a Zoom from them where you don't know who's sitting there, you know, giving them notes or telling them things that you can't see or out of eyesight. I just came back from the Mid-Atlantic Bar Conference where virtual trials were, you know, are still a bit of a thing. That not everyone's back in the courtroom yet. And man, lawyers just hate it. Lawyers do not like virtual trials because they don't feel connected. They don't feel, again, like with depositions, you don't know who else is in the room, who's motioning to them. And so it does create a more challenging work environment, I think, on the legal side of things.
Yeah, you know, I really agree with that in terms of when we're investigating and that sort of thing. I will say, you know, one thing, as challenging as everything was, and, you know, so sad, it forced us to, of course, you know, pretty much everybody has a laptop now. You know, it forced us into giving people the ability to be able to work from home. But, you know, I've thought about this a lot, and we do have people working home some and not still, but in the ethics field, you know, again, I think we've talked about sometimes the laws can be very vague. We work under confidentiality. There's just a lot that can go on just with our colleagues here where we can, you know, so we can have a conversation, you know. Sometimes we know a bit more of something that's in the press or that may be coming our way. And it's pretty easy to, you know, talk to somebody in the hallway about, wow, what do you think about this? Is it coming? Than when we're all segregated away. So, you know, as lonely at times as our life is because of confidentiality, and we take that so seriously, I think that there has to be times that people within an office, and I'm talking about, you know, my teammates, where we can get together and have a conversation. And I think you're just more apt to do that when you're together. But of course, remote work has a lot of great advantages. But that is one piece in our, like I said, kind of our lonely world, you know, where it's just, it just, you know, I'm not going to Zoom with my associate. I'm going to, you know, go to the hallway and say, hey, have you heard about this? What do you think? Or what does this law mean? That kind of thing.
Conversation that would take 15 seconds is 10 emails.
Yes. Yeah.
Were you about to say something? Sorry,
I don't really have anything, you know, to add. From my perspective as someone who works kind of on the watchdog policy side, outside government, you know, I think we found that we can do our work just as well remotely, and also feel like we haven't really missed a beat. Obviously, there are some things about being in the office, especially like on, you know, the policy side or developing kind of the concept for a report, that does flow more naturally when you're in the room with each other and you have a whiteboard and you're taking notes and all of those things. So I think there is some level of creativity that can be lost, but I also feel like there's a lot to be gained from making workers feel comfortable, like they're having a lot of flexibility in their workplace, and you know, remote work offers that. I will say too, from kind of the serving the function of an ethics commission, for example, we did talk to some ethics commissions who have found that they were kind of forced to make some of their operations more transparent because they've had to, for example, move meetings as like online meetings as well. And so, you know, that allows more of members of the public, instead of having to like come downtown to a meeting and raise their hand, they can just log on from their living room and hear what's going on in the commission. So I think there's just a balance of like kind of figuring out what works for the employees so that they're happy and able to do their work, and also what's best for like the mission. And maybe it's just a combination of things. Yeah.
And, you know, certainly on the education side, the work from home, remote work thing is really allowed us at the DC Bar to reach out. And I think at BEGA too. I mean, just look at the number of people that are engaged in Ethics Week right now. When we started Ethics Day years ago, you know, we were lucky to get, you know, 20, 30 people in the room. And now we have an entire week with a very good turnout in a lot of these programs. And so on the education side, it's a true blessing that we're able to reach this many people. We're still trying to figure it out at the DC Bar about in-person versus remote, because while you have people that say they want to come to class, a program, if there's a hybrid option being offered, a virtual option, at the last minute, they choose the virtual option. You know, they don't want to, you know, it takes an hour and a half to shower and get in the car and go to the office or the metro or whatever, and you get all that time back in your day. So I haven't seen a situation. I mean, we've become so adept over the last 2 years at Zoom and the other platforms that you can ask questions, you can interact, you can have presentations on the screen, you can have videos. And so there really isn't much of a reason to be sitting in the same room together these days. At least that's what we're seeing with our folks. So I think that's a very good thing that's come out of this.
Okay, I'm getting towards the end of my questions. So for anyone who's an attendee, if you have questions you'd like to put into the chat, we can see how many we can get to. Okay, so for my question, the function of most ethics bodies, I think, as we've talked about, is to help public officials and government employees ethically serve the public's interests. So as society evolves, how should ethics bodies evolve to continue to serve their functions? And specifically, if there's anything you know that you think ethics bodies should be moving away from, any suggestions?
You know, I am a huge believer in public education. And so I think that the more we can get out there and move forward with really explaining to the public what it is we do and what the rules are. And it's not just the public who needs to know the rules, but the employees, the officials. And so the more we can educate, the more we can train, I think is a very good thing. And I'm always really happy to get rid of the paper, which apparently was a theme for me. So, you know, the more we can move forward, as we discussed in the beginning, but just really, you know, people will call here all of the time with a concern that maybe isn't necessarily covered in the law, but they say, but you're the Ethics Commission, can't you do anything?
But that's
And-
unethical, right?
That's right, but it's
Yeah,
unethical.
well, technically.
And so, you know, we have to educate them in terms of that, in terms of we don't disagree. So then sometimes it's how can we serve as a model? Because we may not be able, I mean, we'll get a complaint and there may not be a violation, but maybe in the dismissal, we have to educate why, you know, we certainly don't want to prejudice the person now who has a complaint and it's being dismissed, yet we have to educate the public as to why perhaps this isn't the best choice or, you know, really what the law is. So.
Should I go?
Sure, yeah.
I think I would say, so when BEGA was created, we were told specifically, this had better not turn into a gotcha agency. Okay, that is not the intention of this. And I think they were right. I think the legislature was right to have those concerns because we're not there to just get people. We are there to make the government a corrupt-free place to work where employees, most of whom are meaning, well-intentioned, ethical folks, can thrive. And so I learned this, I think it was from the director of the New York State Bar when we were first getting, not New York State Bar, the New York Ethics Commission. I think his name was Mark Davies. And we talked about it and he said, look, Darrin, every good ethics regime starts with a clear and concise set of ethics rules that make sense to the employees, okay? Because if it doesn't make sense to them, they'll dismiss it. Like if you can't give a card, a birthday card to your boss without getting an ethics violation, that doesn't make sense to people. So that's important. You've got to have an effective advice-giving function so that when people, not only will they feel comfortable calling you about it, so you need to give them safe harbor so that they can depend upon the advice you give them, that they'll call you, you'll give them the advice, and presumably they would follow it and they wouldn't feel afraid to call. That's key also. And then of course, where all of that fails, with the education and the training component and the advice giving component fails, then you've got to have an effective set of teeth for enforcement. It can't be just a tisk, tisk, tisk. There's got to be some real teeth there. And I think that is where we are, at least in DC, and I'm sure where you are, Liz. And I think as long as we continue to move in that direction, I think we're gonna be in good shape.
I couldn't have said that better, so thank you, because we say that all the time. We're not a gotcha agency, and we want them to call. We want them to tell us who they are and really what's going on. So yeah, there's just a trust factor that is just key. So very well put. Thank you. Very well put. Very well put.
Yeah, I think, I don't have too much to add. I think, being open to new technologies and being receptive to what the public wants and needs is going to be key moving forward with all of this new technology landscape. I think the gotcha point is a good one. Like the point of a lot of these, for example, automated auditing technologies isn't to try and catch people, in a trap. The point is the public deserves this information, and it should be timely and it should be accurate because they have a right to timely and accurate information from public servants or from candidates. And so that's the point of all of this, and remembering kind of those key points of the mission of an ethics commission is going to be very important. And I also think the point Liz made about education being key is a good one, because I think keeping the public engaged and making sure they still understand like the role of an ethics commission, why it's important, is so it is challenging now, but will even get more challenging as attention spans continue to shrink and people like are living most of their lives kind of online, and kind of are thinking about a million things. And so I think just being prepared for the future by knowing what tools are in your toolbox, being ready to leverage them when you need to, and also being willing to adapt when new challenges come up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I didn't see any questions in the chat, so if I missed anything, please put it in there again.
That
Otherwise,
must mean, Rashee, that we explained everything absolutely perfectly, right?
Yes. That's everything there is to know about ethics from here into the future. Well, thank you so much. If anyone has any last words, please go ahead. Otherwise, we can cut you loose. Let's see. Okay, we do have one question.
Glenn.
What can we do to separate elected officials from influence from companies they oversee and legislate? Do you think that the rules need to apply differently to bureaucrats and elected officials?
Boy, that's a whole nother session there, Rashee. We're out of time. Glenn, why don't you call the ethics counselor?
Yeah.
Glenn is the ethics counselor.
If I can jump in on that, I don't know that I really have a perfect answer there, but one thing that we find with our conflict of interest laws, which, the public doesn't always understand, is most, at least in my state, the ethics laws don't completely divorce the officials from their businesses. I mean, there's times, and I'm not 100% if this is what is being asked, but there may be times, and of course, I live in my state is a really combination of you have St. Louis, Kansas City, you have a lot of very rural areas. Well, we have a lot of local officials that have a company, and it may be the only company around. And so they may be doing business, but there's rules that have to be followed in terms of bidding and staying away from them. And so sometimes I don't know that you can always 100% divorce the official from their business, but there needs to be concrete rules. And so, and again, they have to be followed. And so, I think in some circumstances, I'm looking at the question, I think in some situations, I mean, they certainly have to be on parity with others. There has to be fairness, but then again, sometimes, there's going to be involvement, but it has to be fair and transparent.
I also think there's like almost like 5 separate questions in just like the first sentence.
Right.
Like when you think influence that can be from lobbying, that can be
That's true.
from stock ownership, it can be from campaign donations, it can be from just, you know, a spouse's relationship. There's a lot of different ways that influence can impact or come to bear on legislators and officials. And yeah, I think it is worth a whole other session on it.
All right, next Ethics Week. Stay tuned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Rashee.